I have the pleasure of introducing Claire Kramsch, who is a distinguished researcher of German at the University of California at Berkeley. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how the internet and internet communication has impacted the whole field of second language learning. So, welcome, Claire.
Thanks.
I'd like to start off by asking you a little bit about your research, which has concentrated so much on the role and the teaching of L2 culture, second language culture, and the development of a bilingual identity. So let me ask you to contemplate how the internet may have impacted that whole process.
Well, let me say first that the internet, as part of the virtual technologies that we're using now in foreign language education and elsewhere, is inseparable from the conditions under which it was developed and under which it is used. And in the same manner as, say, print literacy, in the 16th century was inseparable from the rise of, to use a sort of a larger term, the emerging capitalism, the emergence of academia, for instance, universities, state laws, etc., that were based on print literacy. In the same way, the internet and the computer technology is inseparable from a late phase of capitalism, which is linked to a market economy that has given us globalization and in which the internet plays, of course, a large role. So let me say right away, because I know that many language teachers want to know whether the internet is a good thing or a bad thing. It's both good and bad, or even that's not even the right question to ask. It has both benefits and risks that are not fully revealed at this time. We're still exploring this new medium, but there are reasons for rejoicing and reasons for being worried. So that's what I say right from the beginning.
Authenticity is a real interest of all language teachers, and often the internet is touted as a place where teachers and students can go to find authentic materials and authenticity. What do you think about that? Is that true? Is the internet a great source of authentic materials, or do we have to take this, as you hinted in your first comments, with a grain of salt and with some caveats?
Well, it's true, of course, that you can find on the internet and you can have access in high resolution, flaming colors and cinematic attractiveness, a whole lot of things that you used to be able to find only when you go to the country. So from a certain perspective, what you're getting on the internet is certainly more authentic than what we had in textbooks or even in the realia that we used to bring back from studying abroad, the bus tickets and the menus, etc., etc. And we have always been interested as language teachers in the authentic, the non-contrived, non-pedagogically beefed up, etc. On the other hand, the question is what the internet giving us really the authentic thing? And in a world where images get copied one to the other, where web pages are not really pages, where email is not really mail, where hypertext is not really text, where all these things, where blogs are not logs, we have a virtual reality that is at the image of reality, but is not the reality that you encounter in all its diversity, complexity, and contradictions in the real life. The images on the internet have already been chosen by somebody, they have been selected, and so the question of authenticity is raised by the emergence of the internet in a big way. In part also because authenticity is contradictory and confrontational and complex, as I mentioned. And what the internet gives you is a kind of a very often tourist kind of view, a stereotypical view. Because the internet, linked to late capitalism, is also the major medium for profit and for for acting upon people in order to sell them things. And that is indissociable from the medium. And so it becomes very difficult to know what is authentic. And what is, in fact, standardized, because the medium standardizes also the reality that you see on the screen. It's only what fits within the screen. It's favoring a visual and an auditory channel, no feel, no smell, no touch. So it's a spectator sport kind of thing. And authenticity is all about lived experience. So the internet offers you a spectacle of reality, but is it the authentic reality that you would get when you go to the place?
So you definitely take issue with someone said the next best thing to going to the country is visiting the country via the internet or via the material.
You see, I wouldn't phrase it as the next best thing. It's another thing. It's a totally different experience. It's an experience that many of our kids and our students have when they prefer, in fact, to text their best friend or to converse with the internet rather than hobnobbing with their parents' friends, because it's much a safer environment. You don't lose face and you don't run the risk of confrontation as you do in the real world. So it's not the next best thing. It is a different experience. And it certainly does not replace going to the country.
You've written also in looking at blogs, comparing blogs to diaries and saying, cautioning us, a blog isn't exactly the same as a diary. How would you like to nuance that?
Well, that remark that I made in the multilingual subject came from a student who came to my office one day. She was an undergraduate, and she came to my office rather distressed because she said she didn't know who she was. And so I understood that that was a metaphor. Of course, she knew her name, etc. But she had what you would call an identity crisis. And she was telling me that every night she writes her diary. Oh, I say, well, that's a good way of finding out who you are. And she wrote her diary, and she said she sends it to her friends and her mother every night. And I said, well, then it's not a diary, because a diary is meant to be read only by you. Then it's a blog. She said, well, no, it's a diary. So I said, so you send it to your mother and your friends, and then do they respond? Oh, yeah, I get feedback on it. Oh, I say, so the next day when you write your diary, do you incorporate that feedback? She says, oh, yes. So I said, well, kiddo, no wonder you don't know who you are. Because she was incorporating all the other words, the other meanings to her life of other people. So, but that is a phenomenon, I think, of our times. There was, in fact, in last weekend's New York Times, an interesting article called "The Buzzwords of the Crowd" that showed a little anxiety or concern about the fact that the words that we use in daily life are being recycled 24/7 by the media, the global media, etc. And what with Facebook and all the social media, our words is less and less our own. We are using the buzzwords. And in fact, the word authenticity is one of those words in itself. Right. Authorship, agency, participation, collaborative dialogue, all these are the buzzwords that before you know it, we are replicating. And the article was concerned, in fact, that scientific inquiry was hostage to these buzzwords, because these are the words you have to use when you apply for a grant, when you describe what you do, or it gives you ideas of what kind of research topics would be hot topics to investigate. And it's these words, and they were concerned that many new discoveries were not made because they didn't have the proper buzzword at the time. So there is a concern, in my view, that our students are hostage to these buzzwords, to these ideas floating around the internet, and it's much more difficult to get through the clutter to an original idea that you might have had and that is not sort of in the air.
You in your writings, maybe one last topic that fits with the types of what we've been saying is you're concerned about the issue of boundaries, establishing boundaries.
Yes.
You're concerned about the issue of reality in the internet context. maybe it's hyper reality, and sometimes the boundaries are lost where
Yes.
even students think that this will be a transparent medium where their thoughts will be transmitted exactly as they intended them to be. I don't know, if you want to make some final comments about that?
Well, that I find is the risk. Of course, the other side of the risk is a wonderful opportunity to explore, to play, to be creative, etc. But the risk is that you lose a sense of the real. The virtual worlds are not disconnected from real worlds. They are just the other side of the coin. So virtual reality is the same as reality, but it's a computer reality. It's so, and because it resembles so much reality, the students and the young people tend to believe that it's the real. And yet the real has harm, has frustrations, has death, which virtual reality never has. And so the problem with this virtual reality is that it imitates reality so well, and the interface, the computer interface, is so invisible that slowly students don't see the difference between talking with somebody on email and talking with somebody in face-to-face, except that we all know the risks of saying things on email and on Facebook that then have real life and death consequences in the real world. So I'm concerned about this conflation of the virtual and the real, and that's why I'm calling for boundaries. It's nice to know what is imagined and what is real, what is just fantasy and what is real. Because if you all only live in the fantasy world, well, then you run the risk of not knowing what's happening to you in the real world.
Thank you very much, Claire.